Old Roller Nation, welcome to the show. Third degree Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belt under Master Pedro Sauer, former Division Two and Division One wrestler. Wrestled at Cal UPA, which we're gonna dissect that a little bit because it's a little bit complex. Welcome to the show, Chris Wells. Chris, thank you for joining. We're super glad to have you.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, quick shout out to one of my listeners for the suggestion, because this is something for the rest of you lazy bums that are listening to this show. One of our listeners said, "Hey, my coach, my teacher has some great ideas on longevity and skill acquisition, and I think you should have him on the show." And he actually hooked us up, and so I'm really happy that we got the chance to do this. So, shout out to Kyle. Put down the Monster Energy and pull your fist out of the wall. And
yes, you knew Kyle.
So thanks. And for the rest of my listeners, hey, if you got somebody that you know that's awesome, help us out. Put us in contact with them because we want the best ideas from the best people. And it's not just jiu-jitsu folk. It's not just PTs. It's not just strength and conditioning. There's ways to develop skill in a lot of different paths, and we can take those lessons. So Chris, super glad to have you, and once again, thanks to Kyle for hooking us up.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
So Chris, you're a fascinating guy. Like just getting to know you a little bit. From my understanding of the early days of jiu-jitsu in America, there effectively was California for a while. You could learn jiu-jitsu in California. Mm-hmm. And then I believe it was Craig Kukok and Renzo Gracie came to New York. And so then it was like there was California and then there was New York. And for a time, that was basically it. If you were in America, that was your only opportunity to learn jiu-jitsu. And then Pedro Sauer came to Salt Lake and opened an academy. And we've had so far two guests from those early days. We had Keith Owen and then Mark Kukro. And so you're our third Pedro Sauer guest. And I just seem to get along with you Pedro Sauer folk real well. So pretty excited about getting the chance to hear about your journey, both through wrestling and into jiu-jitsu and those early days in American jiu-jitsu, because to me, that's a bit of our history, and it's all of our lineage. Even though I'm not of the Pedro Sauer Association, it's that early history is still part of my story.
Yes, it started very early here in Salt Lake. I think he came with the Gracies in Torrance, and I'm not sure. You hear different stories. I know Master Sauer pretty well, but he came to BYU. Someone offered him some money to come there and teach, and then he migrated into Salt Lake City and opened a school. And in 1999, I found that school.
That's pretty darn cool. So you're one of the OGest of the American OGs of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Then, if you started in '99, because that's pretty darn early.
Yeah. When I first went to the school, the academy there on State Street in Salt Lake City, Pedro, obviously a black belt. The highest belt at that time was a blue. So it's kind of the Old West of jiu-jitsu. Not many higher belts around. So
yeah, one actually, Mark Kukro was talking about. Initially, he had to travel every weekend, 4 to 6 hours to train. So he would leave on Friday night and drive to go to train jiu-jitsu over the weekend, and then Sunday night drive back to go to work.
Yeah.
So, my jiu-jitsu journey is very young. I'm a purple belt. I've been at it for about 5 years. And, we kind of have a charmed existence as, modern jiu-jitsu players, in that when I decided I wanted to do that jiu-jitsu was something that I wanted to do, there were 4 places to pick from within a half hour of me.
Yeah.
And in your time period starting out, that was definitely not the case. No. So So did you move to Salt Lake to train jiu-jitsu, or did you find jiu-jitsu there as you lived there? What took you to Salt Lake?
I went to Salt Lake for the mountains. I'm originally from Ohio, and
I'm sorry about that.
I heard you get, they confiscate your books going across the bridge from Ohio to Kentucky. So
Hey, I got a quick question for you. Why doesn't Kentucky float down the Ohio River?
oh geez, I should know this.
Because Ohio sucks.
Hey, that's fair. That's fair.
All right, back to being serious for a second. No, Ohio actually is a great state. My wrestling coach is from Ohio, so I'll forgive the whole state because they got at least one decent guy. And if we get to like you, then we'll make it two.
That'll be awesome.
Oh yeah, and I forgot to throw a shout out to Sean Doherty in Akron, Ohio. So he's been on the show, and he's also a decent Ohioan. So
okay,
I may have to reevaluate my opinions here.
Oh geez.
So big fan of the mountains. Came from Ohio.
Mm-hmm. And so yeah, when I moved here, there was and I'd wrestled all my life, so I was here, and I was like, man. And if you've wrestled since a young age, you need to hit the mats. Your friends get tired of you trying to like grab them and grapple them. They're like, what are you doing? You just you're looking for it. And so, of course, being from wrestling, I started watching UFCs at a young age, or when they started, rather. I wasn't all that young. And I wanted to find somewhere to train. There were two places, Walt Bayless Jiu-Jitsu, or Combat Jiu-Jitsu, and Pedro Sauer. An interesting story, being from a wrestling background, Bayless Jiu-Jitsu was like, oh, I don't have to wear that gi, that thing.
Them pajamas.
Yeah, and I don't have to be barefoot. I'm gonna go check out Walt Bayless. So I was searching for a place to grapple. This would have been 97, I guess, when I was first out here. And very interesting. I go to Walt Bayless. That was the first place I went to. And rolled there once. And it was a great experience. And then I rolled with Mike Colby, who was a black belt from the beginning from Walt Bayless. Very good, great guy. And I was just, I didn't know anything about jiu-jitsu, so I'm in his guard. And I post, and he goes to sweep me.
Oh, yeah.
Crack my elbow. So my first experience in jiu-jitsu, I broke my elbow. And so I went home and said, well, I'm 29 now. Maybe I don't need to be grappling anymore. So I picked up a mandolin and started playing that after I got a little limber. And that lasted until I was healed. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get back at it. At that point, I bought a house that was maybe 4 blocks from the Pedro Sauer Academy. So I go in there, and that's my first experience with Pedro Sauer. And that was an experience.
So what's that like, going from the Walt Bayless Academy to day one at Pedro Sauer? Like, culturally, what did you experience there?
Culturally, it wasn't anything really different. Everyone was very cordial. I mean, at that time, jiu-jitsu being a new thing, everyone wanted to keep people coming. I mean, it was great. Both experiences were great.
Yeah.
When I go into Pedro Sauer's, he was a character above all. Great guy. And I remember we start going live, and I'm going with white belts, and there's only a few blue belts, and I'm doing quite well just from wrestling.
Sure.
And I'm not really tapping them or anything. I'm just like controlling, and and Pedro, in his finest form, he's like, oh, my friend, hold on. Did like this, and I stopped. And he looked over to this tall, lanky guy young kid at the time, probably 18. He's like, Paul Sizemore. And flicked his fingers, and we all know what that meant. Well, I knew later. And and Paul proceeded to come over. Very nice guy. One of my best friends ever. And he just, with wrestling, that's forward pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And he just used that to his advantage and triangle choke me. I don't know how many times. So that being said, I think if I would have went there and that didn't happen, I would have thought, oh, this is cool. I can grapple. This is fun. I can stay in shape, but I don't know how special it is.
Right.
So I learned really quick after wrestling all my life and being tapped by this young kid numerous times. I was like, I will be back tomorrow. And I will be back the next day because I have got a lot to learn.
That's funny too, because a lot of times I think American wrestling culture, where you have to wrestle for your spot,
yes,
gives a little bit. I don't want to use like the wrong nomenclature, but it induces a little bit of a almost like an alpha dog mentality.
Oh, for sure.
And to get caught by somebody is probably pretty uncomfortable with that mentality. So how did you overcome that day one? Because I know we have a lot of wrestlers in jiu-jitsu, but I know we also lose a lot of wrestlers in jiu-jitsu who have the same experience you did, where they get caught a bunch of times and they're like, this shit ain't for me.
Well, that's how it works for everyone. Even if you're not a wrestler, it's like you can come in with a large ego and get tapped many times, and you're like, I'm not coming back. Or you can come in with that same ego and be like, oh, I need to know this, And for me, I wrestled for so long. I was like, I need to not just be able to pin. How am I going to win by pinning you to the ground? You're choking me out. I have to tap. No one's tapping from getting pinned on the ground. So I was like, I want nothing more than to know how to do that and put these two together.
Yeah, I think there's some controversy around the term American Jiu-Jitsu, and I understand that, and I'm not here to drum up controversy or get clicks, but I think if there is an American Jiu-Jitsu, quote unquote, it is that confluence of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and American folk style wrestling.
Yes, and there is a lot there. I know I've developed a lot of different movements and submissions that really maybe, I'm sure they existed, who knows, but are a complete mix. So it makes my style a lot different than others, Just, top and wrist control and sweeping around to arm bars, things that weren't typically done in jiu-jitsu, and you didn't do it in wrestling. It's a mixture of both.
That hybridization.
Yes, and it's fun.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of beauty in that too. I'm a huge fan. So I have a little bit of bad luck in that I'm from Kentucky. So here you can bag on us Kentucky folk if you'd like.
You're even great state, yeah.
Even if I had wanted to wrestle, there was just no opportunity. Our school didn't have it. It's such a basketball state, and because the two seasons run concurrently, if you want to get a girlfriend, you got to play basketball. So like you have to go to a really big high school for there to even be a wrestling program. My high school was not big, and so I do have the good fortune that most of my coaches have a really strong wrestling influence, and so we play together well, and I'm learning. But as I was learning wrestling from my coach Paul Hogan, I began doing some studying online, because I study a lot because I feel behind. I started at 35, and I'm kind of a slow learner, we'll say, and by kind of I mean a really freaking slow learner. So I study a lot. It allows me to express my obsessive side in a way that's not like being a drug addict or something, like, so it's a good thing. And so I actually, before I even knew that about you, from Kyle, our shared listener,
Mm-hmm.
I had found one of your videos about using the double leg as an opening salvo, or like a jab,
Mm-hmm.
to get inside to the clinch, and then once you've made the connection, then you can feel the shared balance between the two, we'll say combatants for the sake
Right,
of
right.
and then you can create the takedown from there. So the double leg is a takedown, but it's also a means of closing the distance and connecting. Whereas I, in my ignorance, had always kind of thought of like the double leg as like a Jordan Burroughs blast double, and that's like that's your option. And I was like, I ain't gonna be able to do that. Like
Right.
my blast double don't have a lot of blast.
Well, I'll tell you where that came from. I did extensive uh, freestyle and Greco growing up, all the way through, and that's my favorite, way more than folk style or collegiate wrestling. I like high amplitude throws, etc. And my highest ranking was I was on the Ohio national team the year we won it in '87, I believe.
That's really badass, dude.
Yeah, and so I made the Ohio national team for freestyle and Greco, but I placed sixth in the nation in Greco. So going back to what I was saying, when it was always a great entry to go down and shoot for a double, like you're going for the legs, which is illegal in Greco, but to shoot down to come up into a clinch. So it would throw people off guard a lot, and then because they're not wanting you to get inside. So
Mm-hmm.
that was always a great entry, and so I could always continue to use it, whether I was doing freestyle or Greco, collegiate or whichever. It just it's a nice entry.
That kind of throws me back to that idea previously, what you're saying of hybridizing wrestling and jiu-jitsu. You were hybridizing folk style and freestyle into your Greco.
Yes. Yeah.
I like that concept because you're giving someone something that's unexpected. Like a straight Greco guy is probably going to have a more linear, path and pummeling to the clinch.
Stand straight up,
Yeah.
and they aren't protecting their legs. So you go down, you change levels. It's like, well, what? And then you shoot up. And so, yeah, that was always one of my favorite entries.
Well, I was going to say thank you for that video because that series of videos helped me out a lot, and it really helped me to think of my takedowns. I don't want to get floofy here and say it's more like a dance,
Mm-hmm.
but the real term would be chain wrestling. It kind of gave me a way to understand chain wrestling in a way that I would have had no chance to otherwise. And it wasn't expressly saying this is chain wrestling, but it was saying whatever your opponent gives you, that's what you take. You don't argue with a big strong guy over something that they don't want to give you. You just take what they do and use that.
Yep, you got to get the movement started. It's all change of direction. And if I make an attack, they change direction, you change direction, and then it'll get somewhere. It's just like jiu-jitsu, it's people think like you said, blast doubles, etc. It's not that at all. It's you gotta create something, you gotta make something happen. In jiu-jitsu, an arm bar, right? Everyone learns an arm bar, but they're not really pulling them off enough, or they're like, how come I can't get it? Well, it's all the setups. Everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you do first to get them to react, to get to where you want to be. So they work all the same. Grappling's grappling.
I kind of leading with what you said there, or combining to it. For me, going from blue belt to purple belt, like within our curriculum, we have from white to blue is the 36 techniques, the original like Helio Gracie combatives. And if you can demonstrate those techniques against a resisting opponent, then you're a blue belt. And until you can, you're not one. Mm-hmm. And then once you can, you are one.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking to my coach about like what is a purple belt, because blue was very, it's very cut and dried.
Right.
And then purple is not. And his way of expressing it, and this was a long conversation. This was not just like, one day, but
Sure.
It's about the movements, not the moves. And I really think when I started to finally make sense, a little bit of sense, and at a very uh like almost amoebic, level of Kazushi,
Hmm.
that's when I started to see the shades of that belt go from blue to purple.
Hmm.
Because then things started coming easier. I wasn't fighting for everything. I was being given certain things and being able to just take them.
That is, well, you hit it spot on. It's trying to get reaction, right? Um, and and that's exactly how I did it too, especially from a wrestling background. That's like this.
Right.
And good jujitsu is not the same as just going as hard as you can. And like, I learned this, now I'm going to try to force this. It does not work that way. And it's way easier on your body to just
Yeah.
the more knowledge you gain. And I tell my students so often, that it's not a slap hands and try to win. It's a slap hands and try to learn. In other words, put yourself in bad positions. Don't worry about getting tapped. Tap and tap often. Then you can come back tomorrow. Don't hurt your partners, even if they're really, trying to resist. Once you got a submission, you can put it on slowly. You don't have to be so aggressive. But we all go through that. We just want to win. I mean, I had
Sure.
buddies going all through the ranks that they're all black belts now, and we just killed each other. Um, and it's so I tell everyone, like, I learned the hard way. You don't have to, but but it's still, it's hard to get someone to understand. But if you just take practice, and when you're training with your partners, your friends, you shouldn't care if you tap. You should always, you don't just like tap if you feel a little bit of something, but be open to being tapped and work things you learn in class, which could open you up to being in trouble. But your progression goes like this. If you do that, I didn't, it took me a while, but now I can look back and see it much more clearer and understand that again, tapping's your friend. Work whatever you need to work. It's not a fight. Just be smooth, and then
So,
things open up.
so you're telling me that when you started to reduce your desire to win, you then began to win more?
Pretty much, because as in
Now,
as
I
in
may be from Kentucky, but
it's true. It's when you start focusing more on your technique and drilling and drilling and drilling, you start seeing the openings way more clear. If you're just fighting for something and not flowing, it's a longer road.
Mhm.
And it took me a while, and it takes everyone a while. I try to tell people, but it's still, you know.
It's I think it's hard because the 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 combative nature of jujitsu is such that, if you feel like you lose, I mean, there's a big cost to losing a fight.
Hmm.
I read it, and I can't remember the name of the book, but it was a basically a breakdown of one of the buds classes for the Navy SEALs,
Hmm.
and all through their training in buds, they get rewarded every time that they win, and because in their line of work, winning has a premium, losing is you pay a high price for a loss.
Yes.
And so it's hard to we all know that intuitively. We all know that losing a fight is a bad thing.
Hmm.
And so if you're in a jiu-jitsu scenario, you're practicing a particular portion of a fight, and to lose that is very painful. We know it will be. And it's
Hmm.
very hard to accept that I have to be willing to lose with purpose today so that I can get to that place where I can win at a premium tomorrow.
It, that's exactly right. And I can't uh, express more than it took me a while, but once I turned that corner and my eyes opened a little more and started to train more for getting better than just like I want to win this. No, actually, I want to try to figure out what I practice this week. And it would be new to me, right?
Yeah.
And if I were to try to go for these things, I could get myself in trouble. But if I didn't go for them, then I wasn't progressing that particular movement.
Right.
So it just went, from me just fighting hard with everyone to getting a lot better, a lot quicker. Like now, I put myself in bad positions all the time because I want to work on this certain escape or I want to do this. And now it's a lot easier because
Right.
I trained forever. But I think that's for me, that's when I started to really turn the corner and progress faster. I could just butt heads all day and go home that night and be like, I tapped him 3 times and he tapped me 4 or whatever. We all think about it when we go to bed, but now it's just like, well, I don't have to tap so much anymore, but I think it's because I put myself in those bad situations. I don't mind being mounted. I don't mind being in someone's crossbody because I'm safe. I feel totally comfortable and I don't feel worried so much. So,
I totally get what you're saying. The reason, so for our experience is almost like polar opposites, because you were you had the physical skill and acumen of a Division I athlete and nationally ranked in high school in a grappling art. I came to jiu-jitsu like having only been in a fight with my brother who was 8 years younger than me, and he kicked my ass, like, so fuck you, by the way. Anyway. But he's fat now, so we're even.
Yeah, you're totally even. And you're purple.
yeah. So he won't even try. He won't even try my shit now. So, but for me in the beginning, I didn't have a choice but to just accept that I was going to eat a lot of crap. At coming in with your previous grappling experience, you could start, jiu-jitsu, like you're a white belt, but you wasn't really a white belt. You're just basically a white belt in submissions and submission defense. Like in terms of the control and the balance and, the movement, you already had a base of hip movement that was, really, really high level. So it was easy for me in the beginning to just accept that I had to learn because I had nothing else, whereas for you, like that equation is different. You probably had a tougher time coming to that conclusion.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Like I was always passing guard and trying to be crossbody, right? What's a wrestler on his back?
Right.
And I remember Pedro telling me one day, he's like, you can do this, and then you can be happy and go home happy, but you don't have a guard. And someone's going to put you on your back. And in class, there's those guys that could. So sure. I that's pretty much my point I was saying when I turned my thought waves around of how to approach this. I went, after going so many years, I went to where I would just go to my back. I would just play guard. I would play guard every single day for like 2 years and not trying to play top game. Because I was going to be great at top game, and if I ever got put in that position, I was not going to be anything. So that's kind of what I'm alluding to is like trying to put yourself where you're not comfortable, because that's how you evolve, and that's you get a full game. Now there's people out there that only do one thing and are so good at it, they may be able to always do it, but I think it's good to develop and grow in the sport and work on your limitations And then you just become, I mean, I love guard now. I mean, that's one of my favorite things. And before it was like, I'm going to win, so I'm going to pass your guard and tap you from top. Not anymore.
That makes perfect sense. I think there was a brief time period where we kind of saw that with leg locks, where a lot of sort of new participants discovered, some of the evolutions in leg attacks.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the older, like more experienced people were like, that stuff's, they were caught in the box of saying that's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were, catching and tapping a lot of people who were in aggregate much better than them.
Yeah.
But in that one area, they were specialized. And so, there was a very, seductive kind of quality to being able to tap really good people,
Mm-hmm.
which, for a time period, I think for a lot of people probably runs the risk of maybe stifling the evolution of their greater game.
Their guard passing goes to nil. It's like, if I'm in this position, I'm sitting back. And again, it's that whole attitude of I'm winning today over I'm learning today.
Right.
And I'm a big fan of that whole idea of learning every day and not worrying about how you perform against a certain person. It's your own journey. You can do whatever you want, but for me, it's being able to progress and work on those things. And if you're only thinking about, beating your friend today, then it's a longer road. So, but you're exactly right about the leg locks. I mean, I've been around it forever, but and Pedro always showed leg locks, but when it started to evolve and certain people really started to dive deep into it, it was a problem for me. And so I started to have to pick up that game too. So.
Right. Well, I think that in the end, that part of the evolution is, it has the opportunity to make us all better. Mm-hmm. For someone, who was already probably a black belt, or at least, very close to one at the time that started, it could become an addition to, a more global game that you have. Mm-hmm. Whereas for someone, who falls into that sort of seductive trap of, hey, I'm winning a lot, so I need to just, this is my thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
and that could have been that's the same thing with your wrestling and top game skills. Mm-hmm. You came in with those and they were well advanced beyond, the white belt and, many advanced belts. And it could have been, and it sounded like it was very seductive to stay in that realm of comfort and say, I'm good here. I'm just going to try to get better here. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that you start to look at maybe a Pareto's principle and say, if I put my effort into this other thing, which is like 20, if I could get 20% better at it, I'd be a whole lot better. We're always trying to find that balance. And I definitely don't have, the answer on how to strike that balance, correctly.
Mm-hmm. It's basically just putting yourself in that spot, and you got to overcome the, what we all have is an ego. I mean, little or big, you want to do well, but it's a longer journey. It's longer to think about, do I win today or do I win in the long run? And so I really try to explain that to people. It's just, you will progress so much faster. We all do. We all do what we do well when we go roll live. I mean, we're always looking for what I do so well, and because then you're gonna, do better. And I just try to change people's minds into using it as practice. It is practice. This is not a fight. I mean, when you're going with your training partners, your friends, that's nothing to worry about tapping to. It's about making yourself better in the long run. And it's, it is hard to overcome because it's a longer outlook on things.
Sure. And you have this immediate feedback in your face, which is I just got my ass kicked, you know.
Yes.
So it's very hard. That's a very hard thing to convince the brain to be like okay with. Like,
Yep.
yeah, okay, got my ass kicked. That's good. I'm happy about that. I'll be better tomorrow for that.
Yeah, no, it's not easy, but once you get there and you commit to that mentally, then things, won't be the first week or the second week, but after that year, you're going to be like, oh, I'm well rounded, I'm comfortable everywhere, and that's where I think we all really want to be.
So a question that I have, because once again, your background is so kind of diametrically opposed to mine, and I want to get some of your ideas and observations about difference in culture and training methodology from wrestling rooms versus jiu-jitsu rooms. What are some things that you have taken from your past in wrestling that have made a big difference and improved your path to and through jiu-jitsu or whatever other martial arts that you've chosen?
First of all, probably drilling. Um, High school, college, we would spend hours doing monotonous drills. And, when we all go into jiu-jitsu class, we love the class, we love doing the drilling. I was always ready to roll,
Mm-hmm.
and we would take, you take the drilling serious, but wrestling and coming from that background, it was you do the same move hundreds of times, the same move you've done thousands of times before. It's developing that muscle memory. We do that in jiu-jitsu. I just don't think to the extent that wrestling is, especially at a higher level. It's drill, 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 and that's the one thing that I like to bring into jiu-jitsu and with the people I teach. We have a saying: drillers make killers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the truth, because once you get that muscle memory and once it's there, when you're thinking about doing an arm lock, you're not going to succeed. It's when you feel that position and you feel it, you do it. You don't, if you're thinking about any move, it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
You should feel body position, you should feel how they're moving, and then you react. You don't really think. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing I took from wrestling to jiu-jitsu and try to really move forward. And people drill a lot, and you'll see those people start to progress so much faster. And it's not the funnest sometimes, but it's necessary.
I think I kind of got lucky on that, and I like what you said there. My instructor, he opens the gym. Obviously, this was pre-COVID. We're still in Kentucky. We're still shut down, but he would open the gym an hour before class, and I came to him at first because you got to understand, I was bad. I mean, it was the question was not like how good at jiu-jitsu can I get. It was like how long before I have to quit because I'm just broken. Because this is not good.
Yeah.
And so I asked him. I was like, is there anything that I can do to make myself better at this? And he goes, well, I open the gym before class. You can come in and you can, get warmed up. You can stretch. You can also, do some solo drills and some practice.
Right. Yeah.
So I said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So I came in and he's in there and he's solo drilling himself, right? Like here's this dude who's a wizard, I can't even make sense of what he's doing. And he's just in here practicing, clearly there's nobody in this room that needs to practice less than him. And he's in here practicing. So I thought, well, obviously, I need to be doing that. So I would come in 15 minutes and then he'd be there. So then I come back and it'd be like 20 minutes before class. He'd be there. It was like 30. Okay. Finally, coach, when do you come in? He's like, about an hour before class. So just like be here then. So that's what I did. And the the beginning of having a chance, just a shred of a chance at being effective at anything, came directly from those solo drills. Because he was putting me in mount all the time, and I was like having like major fight or flight syndrome, looking through coffee straws, like almost unconscious just from being mounted, right?
Mhm.
And he was nice about it. He was like, I'm not doing this because like I get some sort of sadistic pleasure out of like seeing you squirm like this. He's like, maybe a little,
Right, I was
but
gonna say.
yeah, but yeah, screw you, Mike. But it was clearly you got a problem, and I need to help you temper yourself to solve it. And so I started doing those drills of just mount escapes. And in the first 2 years that I did jiu-jitsu, my coach only said good job once, and it was when the first time that I escaped his mount. He was like, good job. And then he clobbered me again, but it was like, it was the solo drilling that gave me that opportunity, because I just didn't have any muscle memory base to even connect anything to.
Yeah, and then again, your solo drilling is making that muscle memory, and when you don't think and you react, then everything's easier. We all start out that way, in certain positions that we're not comfortable with, and
Sure.
it is just panic. And
yeah, I would love to have a story. It was like, yeah, I was fine, but no, bro. Like I thought I was dying. It felt just like drowning. He wasn't choking me, but because of the pressure on my diaphragm and the weakness of my abs, I couldn't resist the weight and the pressure at all. And it was just like every breath was smaller than the last one.
The constricting.
Yeah. So people are like, don't tap the pressure. I'm like, this is a joke. Like I'm dying here.
Yes, I remember those days for sure. Now it's just try to feel comfortable anywhere you are, and everything gets easier.
Yeah,
I mean, that's easier said than done, but
most certainly. What are some other things from wrestling that you have brought to jiu-jitsu to help yourself be better?
Well, one thing we used to do a lot was at the end of a hard practice was just lay down on the mat, close your eyes, meditate about what you did that day, what you did well, what you didn't do well. And you don't have to do it after practice, but I think people do this whether they know it or not. When they go home, they're going to sleep. They do shrimps in bed when they turn. They don't eat normally, but it's that kind of thing. The mental preparation, the whatever you learn that day, keeping it in your brain. Don't let it go. You don't know when the next day you're going to go over that same thing. So.
Right.
And taking notes is great. We did that in wrestling as well. Also, like when you learn, like we learned, once you in the collegiate level, not as much, but when you're going through high level and in high school, etc., is you learn moves when you're learning moves, and let's say you see 3 or 4 that day. Focusing on the one that worked well for you. Because you don't have to use everything, but if you had one that was like, that just flowed well for me, or I used that very well today, focus on that one. Others will come later, but don't try to absorb everything. Find something that really fits your skill set, and then really pay attention to that. And then a little later on you'll maybe see these same moves again, and find one that focus on that. I think people overwhelm themselves. I'm sure you've been to a seminar before.
Yeah,
it's like, well, what did I take away from that? Because I learned so much. And like how I try to teach class, I teach it a progressive way through the week, where we're working on one, and everything's tying together. So we're not just like this is this, and then
Sure.
you don't see it again for a year.
Right.
Like, oh, I saw that move how long ago? So we kind of like try to really focus on things intently and the basics. That's another thing I learned from Pedro and from wrestling, bringing it over, is an armbar isn't an armbar. It's these little tiny details. And you got to take it all in and really break everything down instead of just trying to grab an arm and pull it off or, or whatever. It's how do you get there? And, the chain wrestling, chain jiu-jitsu, it's all grappling is grappling.
Yeah.
And it's so similar. Everything's, the same idea. Basics, focusing on something you learned and trying to implement it when you roll live. That's what works for me anyway.
Well, you know what you said there. It kind of gives. I already knew that I was very lucky, but it makes me very happy about my earliest days. I had the good fortune. There was a brown belt named Jamel Muhammad,
Mm-hmm.
and when I say I was bad, and it was like, embarrassing. I'm not kidding. I am literally the worst person that came through the door ever. Uh, I'm not making this up. My instructor, if he wanted me to take my right arm and move it to my left, he would go, "Now, Harrison, take your left arm and move it to the right." And he would essentially mind trick me into doing the right thing by telling me the wrong thing. Because every time he told me the right thing, I'd just massacre it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got some private lessons with Jamel, and the question was not how good or how quickly can I get good at jiu-jitsu. It was literally, is this a thing that I can do? And his answer was, I'm not too sure. let's give it a whack and see what we can find, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he was like, let's just find any one thing. We're going to go through a lot of different stuff and see if anything feels comfortable to you. And no surprise, it was like guillotines. I have these little infant arms that are basically useless, for anything. But if I get them around your neck, like they're so small, that's like there's no room. Like I don't even have to choke you. I just connect. It's like, oh, it's over.
Yeah.
So he was like, well, your guillotine doesn't feel too bad, and so I was like, well, what do we do with that? So he just showed me, a bunch of different ways to look at the guillotine.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like what you were saying, of like, find something that works for you and stick with that for a while. That's what we did. And I spent 6 months just trying to guillotine everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And to varying levels of no success, but I got close a few times.
Yeah.
And so that early birth of just having something I could be marginally effective at was enough that I could continue and just build like the tiniest little pieces on top of that.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And it does sound like you've been very fortunate with your instructors. So that's good.
Yeah, and I got really lucky because I came from a teaching background. I was a flight instructor previously.
Oh.
And an award-winning flight instructor. So I'm really good in that realm, and I know what quality instruction looks like. And so I knew, as bad as I was, that it wasn't their fault. Like I could have been like, these freaking instructors can't get anything. No, it's just me. I'm the guy that doesn't get it. Because I had a few knucklehead students like that. They're just hard to get through to.
Mm-hmm.
But if you express to them that, from a flight training back, scenario, if you could express to someone that, hey, look, it's nothing is about this whole thing is natural to everybody. So, like from flying, landings and visual flying. So flying, to be able to look outside and see reference to the earth,
Mm-hmm.
was extremely natural to me. Like I landed the first time I ever flew an airplane and it was good.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds like a brag, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm awesome. But wait, there's more. when it came time to learn to do instrument flying, which is flying, in clouds or places like fog where visibility is obscured, I was so bad. Like I just could not create that mental map because I was so good at just seeing things as they were that turning that and making an imagination, I had to literally change the way my brain worked. I remember having these weird dreams and stuff in that time period because my brain was like rewiring itself or something.
It's like, this isn't right.
Yeah. So whoever I would fly with, like you're an instructor, you've already been through the crucible of, all of your shame and embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going through it and they can't sense that because to them, you're almost like a god in terms of like your ability. It's the same as a jiu-jitsu black belt. It's just like you can't even conceive of how good they are. They're beyond your realm of understanding. And to have that person say, look, you're new and it's okay. You are valid. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
your newness is not a shame on this mat. It's not a shame on me. It's not even a shame on you. It is the beginnings, the first steps. So have excitement because as you stumble on these steps, you will have more, and you're going to stumble on them too. But it's going to be a good ride if you just get over the few, like falling on your face period. It gets.
It's just stick to it, right?
And definitely my coaches, like we have there's a cliche like no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. They were good at coming across with the idea that, hey, we're glad you're here. Like it's good to see you, and thanks for coming back. Let's do this.
I say that all the time to my new students, especially like you're teaching the shrimping, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I tell them, and they're like they're hardly doing it, and I'm like, listen, this is awkward for everyone. This is not something you do in your everyday life. This is really significant to jiu-jitsu. Not, I don't know where you would ever start shrimping, So I tell them if it feels awkward, it should. And and like you're saying, at the end of every class, it's like great having you, And then when they come back the next day, I'm like, good to see you again. Everything will get easier. Before you know it, you'll be the guy shrimping across the mat. And the new guy will be there, and you'll say, "Oh, well, look how far I've come."
Yeah.
And it is that it's everything progresses, and what do they say? Every black belt was once a white belt. They just stayed with it, and that's so true. I remember sitting there as a white belt and seeing Master Sauer and other people progress and going, wow, it's going to take forever.
Yep.
But one day, I'm getting my black belt and I'm like looking at white belts and blue belts and they're going, wow, that's great. He got his black belt. Everyone can do it. You just got to stick around. You just got to, go through the hard times. Nothing's going to be easy. But everyone can be a black belt. Just stay there. Keep coming. It's that easy.
Yeah. Easy. Let's say simple, not easy. Because I don't think easy is right, but it is simple. It's a simple.
Conceptually,
it's conceptually easy. All right, I'll give you that. Yeah. Now we're getting into semantics, and we hillbillies don't dig that kind of shit. Like that's not our specialty. So we've talked about some of the elements of getting better, and I'm just super excited to hear the things that you were talking about because they kind of go in line with a lot of the coaches that we've talked to, and that's a good thing. That doesn't mean that what you're saying is unoriginal. It's like we're validating by means of agreement that, hey, these are the principles of what accelerate learning. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the longevity side because how old are you now?
51.
So you're 51 and you've been grappling since you said, I think you were 8?
Yeah.
Okay. So my Kentucky math, like if it gets above 20, I got to take socks and shoes off. So I can't, like we're a little bit, but that's a while, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
What lessons have you learned about how to keep yourself on the mat? Because that's a lot of mileage, and you're not a spring chicken. Our term for it on the Old Rollers podcast is youth impaired.
Yeah.
But there's got to be some lessons along the way that you picked up, and maybe who taught you them, or what have you seen that inspired you to take on the path of longevity that's led to you being able to grapple for that long?
Well, I will say that I've always loved it. I've always wanted to be on the mat. I also learned, when I was going through those blue, purple era, I was doing a lot more. And so I changed my thought process that Pedro told me, to just don't worry about anything, tap, don't make anything a fight. That has kept me healthy. Taking the leap, as he would always say, leave the ego at the door. And the older I got, that made a lot more sense, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big part of it. I also, now I have, I'm lucky because I won't roll. If you're older, you don't have to, you should not feel obligated to roll with everyone. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. Other people can say different, but I'll roll with very good people. I'll roll with white belts that I watch, or blues or purples that I watch, that are not just going aggro. Because I will flow roll with anyone, and I know how to not get them going. Do you know what I'm saying? I can roll and protect myself. If they're really trying hard to pass my guard, I'll let them pass. I'm not worried about them tapping me, because I've been there before, in crossbody. I can relax, wait for openings. I don't overexert myself much anymore. Mm-hmm. It's all about defense. I protect myself very well and don't force anything, but they always give you something. When you're coming through, it's harder to do, because white belts if you start older, particularly white belts going with white belts, sometimes you just get different personalities and you can get hurt. But now it's just safer for me, just because I have trained for so long.
Sure.
But stretching, obviously.
Sure.
If you're into yoga, do some yoga. It's not going to hurt you.
I don't know, man. Sounds a lot like eating broccoli to me.
Yeah. Well, you should do that too.
This conversation is over.
No, but it is know your, especially if you're an older grappler, it's who you roll with, and again, a lot of people will disagree with that. Everyone should roll with everyone, and I will roll with everyone. But I have certain training partners that, in actually the higher level of belt you roll with, it's easier because they understand everything, and it's not just a fight.
Sure.
And so if you can get over that. And I think it goes back to what I originally said is, like, not everything's, needs to be so aggressive. Technique is clean. Take what they give you. Don't force anything. And I've had really good success that way. Even competitively, I can train hard. I can go hard, especially when I'm getting ready for a competition. But it's also not... just fighting so hard. Let things happen. You'll regain. You can come. You can get your guard back. You can sweep them. If I'm fighting tooth and nail not to let you pass, I could get injured. I mean, it's kind of a strange way of saying it, because you don't want anyone to ever pass your guard. But when it comes to like, you know, tapping or just relaxing a little bit and flowing, it just, you know, you can last a lot longer. And I flow, and then I relax, but when I attack, you know, it's when I see it, I do it, and then you know, you don't gas so easy, and you stay healthy.
It's kind of modulating intensity, you know, for what's
Yeah,
appropriate at the moment.
yeah, and that's, again, it's a hard thing to get people to do that, but once you get there, it's just makes everything smoother. I really don't I haven't worried about injuries in a long time. Um,
Something that you said there about, you know, being deliberate in your choice of rolling partners reminds me of one of our early shows with Sambo Stephen Kepfer from New York Combat Sambo,
mhm.
and he's taught a lot of seminars and, you know, around the world, as a matter of fact, and workshops and things like that. And he said while he's teaching, you know, at the end of, you know, a seminar or whatever, everyone wants to roll. He's like, and I roll with just about anybody. But if during the seminar I'm watching people and I can tell that somebody has a mentality that is, you know, like me first and your health doesn't matter to me, like
Yes,
he goes, yeah, and he's like, you get a sense of it. It takes a while, but you know, you get a sense of it. He's like, I just refuse to roll with them. You know, I'm not gonna. I can't take the risk, you know, of you know, losing, you know, X amount of time training because you think this was, you know, the finals of ADCC, while I
yes,
think it's a
yes.
roll at the end of a seminar where I've been teaching for 3 hours and rolling for 40 minutes straight.
That is exactly right. And I pretty much roll with everyone, and he's correct. It's those few people you can sense them really quick, and I can I can see it, and I'm like, you know, uh, yeah. And one guy, that interesting story. He'd always, you know, he'd been there almost a year, and he was a person I would say that I would that if he was on, and he's a stronger big guy, right? And I'm a buck 55, so uh, he's about 230 and big. And whenever I saw him roll, even with the other bigger guys or smaller guys, he's just trying to, you know, it. This is it. This is the ADC finals, you know.
Yeah.
And so I would tell him after class every time, hey, just relax. You know, start working on your technique. You are stronger than these guys. You won't get it. You won't evolve unless you start to just slow down and focus on technique. And it, you know, took a while, but I don't know. It was maybe less than a year. But he just, whenever we'd go around and we'd all, you know, switch partners and switch partners, I would just kind of avoid him, right? And then
Hmm.
he'd always come up next to me, like, "Let's go," and I just kind of, you know, go elsewhere and not say anything. You know, he could tell, but then he, you know, he called me out on it, and so I said, "Okay, yeah, we can roll." I was like, you know, but I always tell you, you know, you just need to slow it down a little bit. And so we rolled finally, and I know he'd been salivating, so I think he got a little over aggressive just in thinking that. And so, well, I turned it up and was kind of not so kind.
Yeah.
And
The old green light.
yeah, and occasionally you have to do that. And I don't, you know, say that people should always do that, but that really helped him. And maybe I should have done it sooner because after that he changed his attitude a lot and started actually being much cleaner roller, calmed down. But I was a little too. I kind of turned it up,
He
but
was
for
sore for a few days.
some people need that, you know. And I don't suggest doing it to people in the beginning, but now he's great. So
So is that Kyle, the guy that hooked us up together?
yeah, that's Kyle.
That son of a bitch.
Kyle's a,
Oh
Kyle rolls well.
yeah, I don't like him. Uh,
I,
but so I think we've covered a lot of the things that I wanted to get to, and I think you have, you know, a lot of really, really interesting ideas and some great experience. If we could circle back a little bit to some of those early days, and this is at Kyle's request because he put us together, and he said that he would never forgive me if I didn't ask you about some of the rivalry stuff between the original Pedro Sauer and then Walt Bayless academies. There was a little bit of you know, like crosstown rivalry going on, and he said that was some pretty interesting stuff. If you could throw a story or two at us from that ball of wax, I'd be pretty interested to hear it.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think it's been made out to be a lot bigger than it was. There was just contention because Walt's a great grappler and he's also a great guy. And it was his background, you know, was from wrestling, and Pedro being new and bringing this jiu-jitsu, there was a normal, healthy animosity between the two. And both wanted to, you know, say, well, hey, jiu-jitsu's better than your combat jiu-jitsu. There's more stories that are not really true.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah. And I like all those guys. I mean, I grapple with a lot of them to this day. So you're not going to find me really saying too much about that. Because I respect all of them, especially after time. When I was first starting there, I heard horrible things. You know, people did, you know, people at Pedro's talked bad on them. They talked bad on us. Did anything really happen? Not so much, you know. Occasionally, one of their guys would come into our school, and there'd be that kind of aggressive rolling, lack of better terms, trying to see who's better.
Checking the pecking order.
Yes. And I will say that they had a different game, which was that hybrid game that I ended up forming more than anything. So it would cause trouble for straight jiu-jitsu guys, and yet our skill sets, you know, caused trouble for them. So it was interesting. I know Walt did train, I don't know if people know this, did train privates with Pedro. So before, you know, all this even started. So I don't think Pedro and Walt ever had a problem even. It was more just like, I'm a wrestler. I don't wear that stupid gi.
Yeah.
And we're jiu-jitsu guys. So it was a natural kind of thing. But, you know, over time, and as the sport grew, respect grew. And they have some great guys that to this day. And so, sorry, Kyle.
Well, I guess to circle back, just as we kind of round out, when you were putting together the pieces of what eventually became your style, you know, of hybrid wrestling and jiu-jitsu, what were some things that stuck out to you of, you know, some differences between the two, where when you put them together, there were these synergistic moments where, you know, something was greater than the sum of its parts?
Well, it's just certain movements that you would be, you know, I wouldn't be wrestling so much and just doing all this jiu-jitsu, and then I would see something and be like, oh, this would really work. One thing I love is a thing in wrestling is called a spiral ride.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that?
I am. For my listeners, we would call it like in Top Turtle, and you reach across and lever your forearm underneath the person's far thigh as a means of breaking them down and opening them up. We would probably, a jiu-jitsu guy would open it up for the hook. In wrestling, you would be using it to like turn the guy.
Or flatten them. And so for me, I use that a lot to turn all the way around the corner. And a jiu-jitsu guy, when he feels that pressure, will turn to his back because they're not afraid of their back.
Right.
And a wrestler will grind down, and not want to not turn at all. But someone that trains lots of jiu-jitsu, they would just like, oh, relieve the pressure and turn. Well, I can come all the way around the top and take the arm. And so I could get that on way higher belted people than me at the time because they're just not familiar. So it's a lot of things like that you just see them because you're just intertwining the two. A lot of things with that wrist control. It's just not talked about enough in jiu-jitsu. It's always, like you said, get my hooks in, attack the neck. You'll see today with Habib, he's always got that far wrist control.
Yes.
And that is just not a topic in jiu-jitsu. And I think that's one of the biggest things, as simple as it may sound, that is a huge opener and a hybrid thing that works great with jiu-jitsu.
That makes perfect sense. I think Habib is a very interesting case because a lot of his mat work specifically is that beautiful hybrid between wrestling and jiu-jitsu. He's not just jiu-jitsuing you, and he's not just wrestling you. No. And he's not just grappling you. He uses his ground and pound in a tactical way while maintaining, top control to create opportunities. He's very much a tactician who's using tools available and not excluding any tools.
And I think also another thing other than wrist control is wrestlers use their head a lot, and I'm not meaning thinking.
Right.
For position, for everything. And again, it's not just something that's as prevalent and spoke about in jiu-jitsu.
Well, something that was taught to me by my wrestling coach, Paul, was the use of head position in passing. Take, for instance, half guard passing or pressure passing. I'm a really short guy. So I can't just, come up and cross face you and pressure you without effectively giving up a lot of my base to do it. But if I can use my head to pin your far shoulder, or if I can use my head to seat your sternum and try to keep your shoulders somewhat less mobile, now all of a sudden my pressure passing goes from being, kind of dorky and like if it works on, people who aren't that good, to I don't have to reach for that crossface and off balance myself and get lucky. I can stay in base and balance and then work against the legs to get my way around and then start to pass.
That's exactly right. And sternum is correct because, being a guillotine guy, if you move your head to the left,
yeah.
I tell everyone, forehead flat in the sternum. Don't, you start to get in the danger zone.
Don't be in the armpit.
No.
I have a partner, a training partner he's a white belt, and he has these little just razor sharp cutting bones on his wrist. And man, if he gets anywhere near a guillotine on you, it is murderous. And I'm like, this guy's not good enough to be. Oh, geez, here we go again. I'm just telling you, I'm fine. I'm not fine anymore.
Yeah. It happens that quick sometimes.
Yeah, something about that particular attribute it's terrible.
Yeah, it's, like we said earlier, finding what you're good at and make it your expertise, but then explore elsewhere. So you don't, because once you get really good at something, people are going to know how to defend it.
Right.
So you got to keep developing.
Yeah, that reminds me something that I liked that Ryan Hall said, where he was saying, whatever you're learning, I don't care what it is. So everyone talks about learn fundamentals, blah, blah, blah. He's like, what if you just really like Barambolos? He's like, well, the Barambolo requires fundamental movement. So you will be doing fundamentals if you do it well, even though no one is going to put a Barambolo in their fundamental curriculum.
Right.
He goes, and secondly, if you like it, you'll probably show up tomorrow, which means if you're having fun, you'll keep practicing and you'll get better. And lastly, your training partners will dictate that eventually you have to move on from whatever thing you're practicing because they will develop a response to it and then they will shut it down.
That is a fact. What you're good at today, you won't be able to do the next day. I mean, I did knee bars forever. I was just a huge fan. And then everyone was started defending against my knee bar. And I tell people this too in class, that you have to remember that if you're doing this and now people are shutting it down because you're training with these people every day, it doesn't mean it's not good.
Right. As someone who hasn't seen you do it every day, it could be like the thing that breaks them.
Yes. So I always tell them to go back to things that you used to do again later on, because people forget and you were good at them. So don't just throw them out the window. I've got a lot of things like that I quit doing it because they caught on to it.
Mm-hmm.
Then I come back to it, 4 months later, and it's right on it again. So,
and you can sharpen those tools up and take those as your competitive tool set too, because
that's yes.
Because in competition, you're not training with those people, so they're not seeing and developing responses to your A game.
That's exactly right. Sounds like you know your stuff there, Harrison.
Well, now let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm just listening, and I'm willing to pay attention. If there's anything, well, except to my wife, and that's not her fault. No. She just doesn't like jujitsu.
Yeah, well, she's good. She allows you to do it, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think every man has to have a vice, and so it was either copious amounts of bourbon, which would probably. I mean, I have good life insurance, I guess, but it would shorten my life. Yeah. Or jujitsu, which may also shorten my life.
Yeah. Well, I enjoy both bourbon and jujitsu. So.
Oh, we got it. All right. Well, I can forgive a little bit of your Ohioanness if you're a bourbon fan.
Yes. Yes, very much.
Oh, that's you're a friend of the show now, because we're definitely fans of bourbon around here.
Well, I'll tell you, that's another way to longevity. After you get that hard night of jiu-jitsu, have a nice nightcap.
I like I got two dogs that like to roll around in the grass in the backyard. I like to sit on the back porch with a good bourbon neat and watch those two dumbasses do their dumbass shit.
Yeah. That's relaxing. Brings everything back down to normal. So.
Yep. So we've covered basically every element that I wanted to cover, and there's an element of the show that we have been using. I've been doing it off and on, partially because I'm forgetful. I actually do like it, but I'm not certain that we're going to keep it. But for now, we're calling it 3 Up, 3 Down, and so a lot like Reddit, where you upvote something. Mm-hmm. Tell me 3 things in your career, either as a wrestler, a jiu-jitsu practitioner, a grappler, a competitor, or a coach, that you feel like you're really glad that you did. Those 3 things really made a big difference in your own or your partner's or your students' rate of learning or longevity. And then on the converse, 3 things, going down, because we haven't even talked about mat culture or any of that stuff. And I know, coming from the Pedro Sauer Association, like, culture is a big part of, I think, what makes it work so well. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of missed that in a way. I'm hoping that you'd be willing to come back on the show and maybe talk about that some. Sure. But for the 3 Up, 3 Down, this can be anything from drilling to, saying hello to the students and glad you're here, to being willing to go on your back, or anything else, strength and conditioning. It's completely free reign, like eating broccoli. It doesn't matter. Just 3 things that you done that you're glad you did, and 3 that you wish you had either not done or stopped doing earlier.
Oh, let's see. Well, I will go back to one thing I referenced earlier when I listened to Master Sauer and decided to not fight for Top Game, because it just changed everything. And even though that was difficult for a while, I love my guard game now. And before, I would have just kept doing the same thing and maybe done it well, but I wouldn't be as well rounded. So thrilled about that. Another great thing is Master Sauer asked me to he saw me working with other students doing takedowns. And so after about only 2 years or year and a half of being there, he gave me a class, a takedown class, which I thought was awesome because a lot of jiu-jitsu schools weren't doing that at the time. And you even see people complain that, well, they don't have takedowns, they just sit down or whatever. So the respect to him for giving me that opportunity and to be able to have that class was like Fridays, just once a week. But I had a lot of people, join that class and really enjoy it. So that was great.
Yeah.
Let's see. There is a lot of things with students. I just don't know what in particular, because it's a real joy to be able to see them develop. So I may have 4, but
which is fine. We'll give you a bonus one because you're Ohio and you can't count.
But it's the joy you get from the students, and the transition from practitioner to instructor is never, unless you're just natural, is not always easy. And it's not for everyone, but to go do that transition, that was one of the best things ever, because you get to see the development, and it's amazing. And it happens every day, even the little things. It's like, oh, I showed that and he pulled it off.
Yeah.
You get so much out of that, and that's awesome. But my 4th was, I was scared to death this last Master Worlds. I saw my division and I was like, oh boy. And I was like, I might have to go up against Renato Tavares. And as a white belt, I was watching his tapes. And so I really had to be like, am I going to sign up for this?
Right.
And I mean, there was quite a few guys, and who knew if I'd have to go up against him. But he was kind of an idol of mine just because we'd watch his tapes. And
sure.
And so I went to Master Worlds. I saw the brackets, and I had a guy before him, but he would be my second match. And so I had to overcome some mental issues and nervousness because I'm going to get, it's kind of surreal.
Yeah.
And, so I was like, well, at least I'll get a lot of my nerves out. The first guy I have, I'll have to get through him first, so I'll focus on that. I'm sitting there in that waiting station they have you in, and all of a sudden they come up and that guy didn't make weight. And so first match out of the block, and out to Tavares. So I was like, holy crap. But anyway, so I'm just glad. It's the first time I lost that I was happy with how well I did. So it went it went the distance, and in the last 30 seconds I got swept. So I lost 2-0 against someone who was an idol of mine. So
yeah.
It's probably one of my greatest achievements, I would say, for myself, losing and yet being like, I don't feel so bad.
Yeah. I could, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. The downside, let's see. This should be easy, right?
It's not. I'll tell you, it's not, because we work hard. To be a passionate person, you have to have a sense of trying to do things well. So it's hard to say, well, I did this bad for a really long time, or I shouldn't have done this, or I didn't change this.
Well, we can. I can own up to this one. Again, it was before a IBJJF tournament, and I went with my friend to Vegas, a non-practitioner of jiu-jitsu. And the night before, I had a few too many bourbons.
That's not going to be a good feeling trying to compete on that.
I did not perform very well the next day, and so I will forever regret that. Also, I gained something from it, as in, like, why did I train so hard for
Right.
this? And then, let that happen. That's just stupid. I mean, I didn't get crazy drunk or anything, but it was like, that's just not.
Wasn't part of the plan.
No, it wasn't part of the plan at all. I don't know. That's a big regret. Probably also not trying to open up my game sooner, and just trying to rely on what I had. I think I would have progressed faster if I could have been able to see that. And it's not, I mean, it's not a big, huge deal, but I think once I figured it out, in my mind, I figured it out as like, just let things happen. Don't try to force anything. Everything went so much faster.
Sure.
I wish I could have been able to do that instead of just try to kill everyone every second.
Oh yeah, just like what is it? It's not Apocalypse Now. The movie where the Marines in the Vietnam. It's like kill, kill, kill. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, you got one more.
Oh,
that was two.
Oh crap. Let's see. Well, I wish I would have started jiu-jitsu earlier.
Yeah, that's one for me too.
There weren't all that many opportunities, but that would have been great. I see these kids these days, man, they're killers quickly.
Yeah, they're wizards.
Yeah, and I started at 30, so 21 years now, but still 30 was, like it's not so easy to start at an older age.
Yeah, it wasn't very easy. I'll say that. Like,
hey, and congrats, because it takes a lot of guts, because it really does.
Well, I don't know.
I love to see the older, 30, 35 isn't really old, but it is to go into something outside of your comfort zone and to stick with it. So
I had some advice going in, and I'd had a little bit of money saved up, and the advice was pay for a year in advance, because you're going to want to quit. It's gonna try and chew you up and spit you out. If you can stay a year, you can probably stick it out. But if you can't stay a year, you'll find a way to quit.
Mm-hmm.
And this person knew that I'm pretty tight with money. I don't like spending any of it. Like I have a pair of shorts. My wife just sent me this stupid meme because it's a guy in a pair of cargo shorts with duct tape on the back, and it says, "My wife threw these away, but they're my favorite shorts, so I fixed them." And I was like, actually, I've been working out. I got a pair of cargo shorts that I got to duct tape because I'm gonna do that. So this person knew that about me, and they said just pay for a year in advance, and that way you can't quit. You have no option. You won't. If you paid for something, you'll do it. Mm-hmm. And that's what it was. I'm not trying to say that I was brave or that I was tough, because I was neither. I sucked, and there were time periods where I would sit in the parking lot and try to find something. Like I'll go home and clean house. That'll be productive. Like there was a day where it was 100 degrees, 104 degrees, and we basically trained in a place that wasn't air conditioned. Mm-hmm. And it was a gi day, of course. And, when you first buy a gi, you don't know one gi from another. So I got this really heavy, like probably was a judo gi, and just like,
wasn't that Howard Combat one, was it?
I think it was like Buffalo Combat Systems or something like that. Like this thing was like sandpaper, like a 10-pound sandpaper sack wrapped around your body. Mm-hmm. And I walked in, and the only 3 people that even showed up that day, because it was 105 degrees, were me and my coach and another black belt. And I'm a white belt in my first year, and I'm just like, well, that's about fucking right, like.
Yeah.
And so I had one goal for that day, which was to actually do the class and hopefully not die of like heat exhaustion or something, but not just go home and burn my gi and quit. So I go to take this thing off, and it weighs like 100 pounds. And I'm like, well, this thing wouldn't even. I couldn't burn it if I threw it at the sun because it's just completely waterlogged. So I was like, no matter, even if I lost my goal, I couldn't set this fucking thing on fire.
Oh jeez. Yeah, I remember a few times driving around the school and looking at what cars were there and being like, oh, maybe not tonight. Way back
Man.
Way back in the beginning, I was like, oh, it was hard, and here's the thing about, and I'm sure you realize this, so I'm not saying anything new, but a lot of times, when you weren't feeling that great or you didn't do well that week, it takes everything to get yourself in there. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, and I tell my students this, I guarantee you, every time you go, when you leave, you are going to be so happy you went. It is never the case that you're like, oh, why did I do that today?
Right. The getting through the threshold is a lot tougher than doing any of the roles and all that. Mike Mijas, Mr. Jiu-Jitsu, he calls those mental stripes. Mm-hmm. He's like, you don't get that stripe on your belt, but that was the day that you got a mental stripe just for walking through the door. He's like, you could suck and they could wipe the mat with your back. Mm-hmm. You could be the mop. Yeah. But you get a mental stripe for that day, because if you sat in the parking lot scared to death and you step through the door, then you're a tough dude today, even if you just got creamed.
Yep, that's exactly right. And you always feel better from having done it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Another thing that made a big difference to me was, I don't know where I got it. I think it's probably a YouTube video, but someone passed along the idea of finding the smallest victories, because when you're losing, you're just losing and it sucks. And I don't like to lose. I'm not somebody who's like, yay, I get to tap, that's mm-hmm. not me. Mm-hmm. But when you're just getting clobbered, at first there just feels like no advancement. Mm-hmm. And so I had a partner, his name's Jason. He's a great guy, but he had this amazing club collar tie to guillotine. Mm-hmm. That would he would hit me in the back of the neck, and it was practically knocking me out. Mm-hmm. I was just like, what is going on? And he would guillotine me 10 times in a round. He was just that good at it and just loved that maneuver. He still has a great guillotine. Like, he just keeps, sharpening that knife. Yeah. But I remember thinking, it's not realistic for me to think that I'm going to ever tap this guy. But what if I can take 10 guillotines and turn them into 9? Or what if I can take 10 taps and say, instead of 10 guillotines, it was 8 guillotines and I made him take an armbar? Yeah. If I made him flow away from the guillotine to something else, then I have to consider that a victory. Yeah. And so that went from like driving home wanting to kick my dog to, just being like, hey, you know what? Today it was a successful day. I only tapped 8 times the guillotines,
That's correct.
The smallest. Just embarrassingly small. Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough for being willing to join us. You've shared some amazing insights and some great stories, and I can see why Kyle wanted us to get the chance to interview you. And I thank Kyle for passing along your putting us together, because this has been just a really, really great show. If some of my listeners want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, how would they go about that? Where are you teaching, and what kind of internet presence do you like to be contacted through?
You can contact me through Facebook or Instagram. I'm Meat Angel.
Meat Angel. I like that.
Yes. Anyway, I started recently teaching at when I say brand new gym, I mean brand new, as in they built it just this year, like the building itself. It's called The Front. It's a climbing gym, one of the best in the country. And one of the guys, George Polton, who I've taught for quite a long time, has been a part of that climbing gym. And so we got to work together and build a jiu-jitsu only room there. So now the front climbing gym has a jiu-jitsu team or club. And what's beautiful about it, it's a brand new building. It's on the 3rd floor overlooking the Wasatch Mountains with a window that's like humongous. It is sharp. So I've been teaching there, and I also teach at Fusion Academy, which is Eddie Edmonds, also a black belt, 3-stripe black belt under Pedro as well. So either place, you can find me there. Mornings usually at the front and evenings at Fusion.
That sounds awesome. Once again, I really can't thank you enough. This has been, just a fantastic show. We'll get you a link to it so that any of your friends that you want to hand it along to. For my listeners.
I teach.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I teach with Seppi at his school. It's only once a week, but that's where I see Kyle most of the time. So. I didn't want to leave him out.
Yeah, well, he would crush a Monster Energy drink on his forehead.
You should see him, man. He's getting proficient in the gi. He tried to avoid it for the longest time.
Yeah, he would have been a good one of those Walt Bayless fellers wearing the shoes and the no gis and all that. Yep. But I forgot where I was. Oh yeah, I was going to say I'm hoping to be able to make a trip out your way to visit another friend that lives in Utah. So if I get the chance, hopefully we can come out and do a lesson with you and maybe put together a couple of things there, because I would like to get some more takedown work with you. Mm-hmm. And if you said you were a killer at knee bars, I like knee bars too. So I'd like to get some of your thoughts on them.
I got some nice entrances to there, so. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm here. I'm ready and available.
Well, that would be fantastic, Chris. I'm going to sign off, and for my listeners, if you're liking this content, I'm using the wrong words here because I'm thinking about getting in contact with Chris. Yeah. If you like the content, give us a like, give us a subscribe. Hey, maybe share it with a training partner. I mean, I know you don't want your training partners to get better, but one of the lessons from this show is that rising tides lift all ships. So you make them better, they'll make you better. So give us a hand, help us grow the show. The more people that are part of our network, the more people we can get to come talk to us. And we've had some really amazing coaches. We're having trouble with the nutritionists. Like, they're too busy. I think right now with COVID, anybody that's in the medical field is pretty tied up. But we need some help, and growing the network is going to, give me the ability to get a more diverse group of people that we can talk to and learn from. So help us out. And just like this was a contact from one of our listeners, if there's somebody that, is a coach or a PT, nutritionist, that you think has good thoughts on performance and longevity, help us out. Put us in contact. It means a lot. It'll give us the chance to help you and help ourselves, help the whole network get better. And we'll all be better at this thing that we love.